Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give folks a few minutes to trickle in as we just started the webinar, so hold tight. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today for the third public workshop on the fiscal year 2022-23 update to the long-term plan for light-duty vehicles and clean mobility investments. My name is Raquel Leon, and I am the staff lead over the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, or Cvrp, as well as the lead for this year's update to the long-term plan for light-duty vehicles and clean transportation equity investments. I am joined today by Lisa Mcgovern, manager of the funding plan, as well as the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project and financing assistance for lower income consumers program. Erin Hilliard, manager over the Clean Cars for All program. Tabitha Willman, manager over Access Clean California, as well as various program lead staff. I'm also joined today by the Cvrp administrator, the Center for Sustainable Energy, or CSE, and Grid Alternatives, the administrator for Access Clean California. Before we get started, I do want to go over some logistics for today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We do anticipate a copy of the recording will be made available on the Low Carbon Transportation Investments and Air Quality Improvement Program Meetings and Workshops webpage in approximately 2 weeks. Materials for today's workshop are available on the same webpage, and a link to these materials has been dropped in the Zoom chat. In addition, we will be leveraging Zoom's raised hand and Q&A box features to facilitate comments and questions today. If you would like to submit comments or questions in writing, please use the Zoom Q&A feature, and we will address policy-related questions verbally for the benefit of all attendees. Please remember to state your name and affiliation when making a comment or asking a question. We also ask that you hold your questions until the discussion period after each presentation, but you are also more than welcome to drop those questions in the Q&A box along the way, and we will address them during the discussion periods. If there are any Zoom disruptions today for any reason, including malicious intent, we will immediately end today's meeting and send out another notice to reschedule. And lastly, we are unable to allow anonymous meeting participants for security reasons. So please make sure your name is clear on the Zoom platform. And if you have called in, we will adjust your phone number and call on you if you raise your hand based on the last 4 digits of your phone number. If you are a member of the media, we do ask that you please submit all questions through our Office of Communications at comms@arb.ca.gov. That is comms@arb.ca.gov, and we'll drop that email into the chat as well. Today, I will provide a brief overview of the long-term plan and the public workshops we have held to date. CSE will then provide information on how we've utilized community-based organizations and other grassroots organizations to increase program reach to priority communities, which will then be followed by an update on Access Clean California by program staff and Grid Alternatives. We will round out the workshop today with an overview of our long-term vision for Carb's vehicle purchase incentive programs and end with an open discussion and next steps. As directed by SB 1275, we are providing a major update to the long-term plan for light-duty vehicles and clean mobility investments this year. Among other things, SB 1275 directed Carb to include a long-term plan for Cvrp and related programs in the 2016-17 funding plan, and to update it every 3 years through January 1st, 2023. While Carb staff have re-examined funding need forecasts every year since in each annual funding plan, this year we are providing the second major update to this plan that will cover the time frame of July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2025. As part of the long-term plan, staff must include a 3-year forecast of funding needs to support the goals of technology advancement, market readiness, and increased consumer acceptance of zero-emission vehicles. The second element of the plan is a market and technology assessment for each vehicle technology to inform the appropriate funding level, incentive type, and incentive amount moving forward. The long-term plan also requires an assessment of when a self-sustaining market is expected and how existing incentives may be modified to reflect changes in future market conditions. In addition, the supplemental report of the 2018-2019 Budget Act requires Carb to update the Cvrp forecast annually until January 1st, 2030, and as part of the forecast, include the total state rebate investment necessary to facilitate the goal of placing in service at least 5 million zero-emission vehicles by January 1st, 2030. Annually updating the Cvrp forecast until 2030, projecting sales figures of electric vehicles, and assessing marketing efforts of electric vehicles by automobile manufacturers, among others, are the top 3 elements of the budget bill language that intersect with the requirements of SB 1275. Therefore, we have chosen to cover both of these required reports through the same process. This update will also include a separate but related effort to update the long-term plan for clean mobility equity investments. Staff is utilizing this effort to update the long-term plan to take a deeper look into vehicle purchase incentives to see how we can improve not only implementation, but more importantly, access to these incentives. Staff held the first workshop on February 10th, 2022, which covered updates on the ZEV market and technology types. The second workshop for this effort was held on March 30th, 2022, and the focus of that workshop was to discuss building and supporting a sustainable and equitable ZEV market here in California. Recordings and all meeting materials for these workshops are available on Carb's Low Carbon Transportation Incentives Meetings and Workshops page for those who are not able to make it. Additionally, we have held a handful of program-specific work groups through May of this year and plan to hold a few more before finalizing our proposal for this year's funding plan. These working groups have been held in order to do a deeper dive on critical program changes that may be needed in support of this 3-year plan and fiscal year 2022-23 funding plan development. The purpose of today's workshop is to provide updates on our work with community-based organizations and other grassroots efforts, as well as update you all on Access Clean California, and touch on how we can utilize both of these efforts to increase the reach of our vehicle purchase incentives. Lastly, one of the main goals of today's workshop is to discuss the long-term vision for light-duty vehicle purchase incentive programs by discussing draft funding splits that will fund these programs over the next few fiscal years, and potential program change considerations that improve the consumer experience and increase the equitable distribution of funds from these programs. So before we move on, I did want to open up for any questions or comments on this introductory material. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Aria Berliner, who will be helping us with Q&A today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start calling on raised hands, in an effort to allow as many people to ask questions or state comments as possible, we are asking that you keep your comment or question as brief as possible. If you have a longer comment or question, we are happy to meet with you outside of this workshop to discuss your questions or comments in greater detail. You can use the Zoom feature to raise your hand. For those of you participating by phone, please press pound or #2 to raise your hand. When you're called on, please state your name and affiliation. There are no raised hands.
Okay, we'll move on. And if any questions pop up, we'll have plenty of opportunities along the way for you to ask those questions. All right, I'm now going to turn it over to our first presenter, Ben Mcneil with the Center for Sustainable Energy, who will discuss how CVRP's partnership with various community-based organizations and various grassroots efforts has helped increase program utilization in priority communities, and then discuss some plans for increasing the number of community partnerships to reach those that need it most and have yet to benefit from these programs. All right, Ben, I'm going to stop sharing so that way you can put your presentation on the screen.
Thank you, Raquel. Hello, I'm Ben Mcneil. I'm a data scientist at the Center for Sustainable Energy. I'm here with Jin Zhu, who works on CVRP outreach. Today, we're going to be talking about community-based organizations and how they help the CVRP. Center for Sustainable Energy administers the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project. And as part of a multi-pronged strategy, CBOs are in communities around California, helping to reach communities of interest.
Ben, before you go on, I just want to let you know we can't see your slides if you're sharing them right now.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
1 second. Oh. Okay. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right. So community-based organizations, we're going to talk about what they do and how they help CVRP increase access for disadvantaged communities and low-income communities. We'll talk about how they've affected or influenced participation in the program. And then we'll talk about the future plans for the CVRP partner network and research through CSE. So community-based organizations are trusted community members. They have knowledge of community priorities and challenges. They provide a variety of important services, including financial literacy, education, weatherization services, job training, and health advocacy. And CBOs are the foundation of the CVRP Community Partner Network. Together, they have statewide coverage, and they're often located in disadvantaged communities. Here's a list of the community partners that we'll be talking about. Notice they're located in different counties throughout the state, and the Central California Asthma Collaborative also works with additional partners to disseminate information and put on events and do all types of activities. So not limited to just these 7, but these are our under something like the CCAC. We're getting even bigger coverage. CBO activities are widespread. For CVRP specifically, we look at community workshops, test drives of electric vehicles, canvassing communities, art contests, digital marketing, and one-on-one educational assistance on CVRP and other stackable incentives as their major activities to help spread the word about CVRP. So between 2019 and 2022, we found 373 CBO activities that have been recorded, amounting to an attendance of over 69,000 individuals and over 100,000 interactions. These again are done by the partners that we saw on the previous slide. And these activities include in-person events, including community events, workshops, presentations, and consultations, as well as distributed activities such as flyer distributions, newsletters, phone banking, and social media posts. These events occur throughout the state. We see in Southern California an aggregation of events in the Los Angeles area. We also see another clustering in the San Bernardino region. We see a third cluster in the San Diego region and also in Imperial County. In Central California and Northern California, we see clustering of events throughout the valley, the San Joaquin Valley, as well as some Stockton down to Merced, and Fresno down through Bakersfield. Most of our attention in this area has been in that region due to the negative effects of air pollution. We also look at how potentially these CBO activities are influencing CVRP participation. In order to do this, we look at the CVRP consumer survey. It's a survey given to rebate recipients 6 months after they make their purchase and receive their rebate. They answer many questions throughout this survey. One reads like this: please rank the top 3 most influential information sources when you were deciding whether to acquire a plug-in electric vehicle. There were a bunch of different responses, and one of them was nonprofit organization. So from respondents who chose nonprofit organization as one of their top 3 responses, those respondents become part of this group that was influenced by nonprofit organization. If they did not answer nonprofit organization as one of their top 3 responses, then they are in this gray group, not influenced by nonprofit organization. So as we go on through the next couple slides, these are the 2 populations of interest. First, we looked at EV conversion influenced by nonprofit organizations. The one question read, would you have purchased or leased your vehicle without the CVRP rebate? To which we found that those respondents who were influenced by nonprofit organizations were less likely to have purchased or leased their CVRP eligible vehicle without that CVRP rebate. We also found that individuals who would not have purchased or leased any electric vehicle, among those, for those participants who would have not entered the EV market at all, they were less likely to do so if they were influenced by nonprofit organizations. So we can say that among that group that was influenced by nonprofit organizations, the rebate was more essential to them becoming part of the electric vehicle market or to become electric vehicle adopters. We also looked at the populations that were influenced by nonprofit organizations. We found that participants in LICs, low-income communities, and participants in disadvantaged communities were similar among those 2 groups. But we found that increased rebate recipients were more likely to be influenced by nonprofit organizations than not. So the increased rebate recipients are anyone who qualifies for the increased rebate who are low to moderate income. We also found that among different ethnicities, Latino and Hispanic populations were relatively similar influenced by nonprofits or not. East Asians were less likely to be influenced by nonprofit organizations, and white and Caucasians were of a higher population among those influenced by nonprofit organizations. We also found that among other ethnic groups, the numbers were relatively small in CVRP as a whole. And that kind of leads us to our next slide. The upcoming additions to the community partner network will include working, and are currently including, working with tribal communities to coordinate outreach and test drives of electric vehicles, outreach to the African American community, notably a partnership with Prior Consulting, which is a Black woman-owned business, and the addition of 2 community partners, Community Housing Development Corporation and California Interfaith Power and Light. So we're hoping to continue coverage and continue to interact with our communities by expanding our network. We also plan to study the effects of community-based organizations moving forward. A couple ideas are exit surveys for participants after events, workshops, and presentations to understand what were the barriers for attendance, to understand what the knowledge difference was before and after of CVRP, and to understand the motivation for attending. We also can add additional survey questions to the consumer survey that get at specifically the CBOs that we are interested in. And just to backtrack a little bit on that, the nonprofit organization is kind of a catch-all for lots of different organizations. This would be more specific towards CBOs. We also will be conducting interviews with community-based organizations. We want to understand how CVRP can help the CBOs and support them in their actions. And we also want to know how their activities, how effective they believe their activities are on the participation in the program and increasing the knowledge base. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and open the floor for questions.
Actually, before we open the floor to questions, I believe Jin Zhu from CSE would like to add some additional commentary.
Yes, thanks, Raquel. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I just want to add that first, thank you, Ben, for the wonderful presentation. Just want to add that our CBO partners are really essential to everything that we do. Like Ben mentioned, that the CBOs, that as everybody knows, that they are really the voice of the community. They live in the community. They represent the community. They sort of they are our way into this, especially into those hard to reach communities. They have amazing trust with the community members. So, and they also bring back a lot of feedback, especially with our partner over at the Central Valley Asthma Collaborative. Those folks, not only have they created their own Central Valley Collaborative focused on EVs, they also have a seat at the table to provide multiple feedbacks to many things that we do. They want us to change our approach on certain outreach strategies that we have, including change of our collateral to speak more of the community, or to simplify our messaging to our community members. They are the one that did the art contest, which generated amazing results to the folks, to the younger folks that's in the community, just generate some amazing results. So I really want to say that our CBOs are a great partner, and we continue to look forward to work with them in the future. They are definitely essential in our outreach strategy. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Aria, I'm going to turn it over to you to see if we have any raised hands or if there's any thing in the Q&A box we'd like to address.
Thank you, Raquel. Good afternoon, everyone. First up, we have Eileen Tutt. Eileen, I have unmuted your mic.
Yes, thank you. This is Eileen Tutt with the California Electric Transportation Coalition. And I really appreciate your slide presentation. Just a couple of clarification questions. On slide 9, you talk about EV conversion influenced by nonprofit organizations, but I don't know what those numbers, is that 45% are, would purchase or would not? It says, would you have purchased, but it doesn't say, is the answer yes or no? And what are you saying is I guess I don't understand this slide.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. And let me try to clarify the best that I can. As you read it kind of second time, that's correct. So if you answered yes, that you would have purchased or leased your exact CVRP vehicle without the rebate, then you contribute to that bar. So 45% said that they would. Those who were influenced by nonprofits, 45% of that population said that they would have still gotten their vehicle with the CVRP without the CVRP rebate, whereas 52% said that they would have without the CVRP rebate. So we interpret that as the CVRP rebate was more essential to the population who also was influenced by nonprofit organizations.
Okay. I find that slide particularly hard. So what's the difference between the right and left side?
Yeah, so the right side is a subsequent question where we ask, what would you have done otherwise? And there are several options there, whether it's get a used EV, not get any vehicle, keep your old vehicle, get an ICE vehicle or a gasoline vehicle instead. So that's like the same question and looking at it the same way. If you answered that you would have still gotten an EV of some kind, then you contribute to that bar. But if you would not,
but let me just clarify. So if you look at those two graphs, it's the same question on each side with different percentages. So that's why I don't understand this. Like, it looks like you asked the same question and you got different. There's no difference between the right and left side in terms of the question. The only difference is this. So that's why I like.
Sorry, there's a very subtle difference, and this is a great question. I'm glad that we can return to it. It's your vehicle versus an EV. So it is a subtle difference, and probably those options, But
you wouldn't get a CVRP rebate unless you purchased an EV. So anyway, you understand this graph, it doesn't mean anything, because would you have purchased or leased your vehicle? If your vehicle isn't an EV, you wouldn't have gotten the CVRP rebate. So I'm not clear. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. I'm just telling you this. I don't know what this means, but it's not, I don't think it's clear at all. Does that help? And I would like to know what it means. Like, I'd like to know, you're saying an NGO, if you have a relationship with a CVR, with a nonprofit organization, you're more likely to purchase an EV, is what I think this graph is saying, although I will say that it's not clear.
Yes. So I'll try again. What it means to me is, for all these survey respondents already received the CVRP rebate, but if that wasn't an option, what would they have done instead? And 63% of them would have still tried to enter the EV market, and 57% for the other population would also have tried to enter the EV market. But because of that disparity, the CVRP rebate was more essential to the population that did utilize the program.
Okay, and then moving on, and I'll just tell you that I still don't understand it, but that's my own problem. I can talk about it offline. And then on the populations, the Latino, East Asian, and white, I think it's slide 13. So this, and I'm sorry, you don't include African Americans because.
Yeah, so we do have a slide for that as well, but the numbers are very small and probably not statistically significant.
Got it.
Yeah. So
okay, thank you. Sorry.
Absolutely.
That's perfect. That's all. I just was wondering. That makes a lot of sense to me, by the way. And thank you. I think this is super helpful, and I am going to follow up offline.
Please do. Yeah. Thank you.
It does not look like there are any more raised hands.
We do have 2 comments in the Q&A box, both from Beverly Deshow. The questions in the survey are confusing. I cannot imagine you'd get very accurate info. And I'm educated on EVs in general, and I'm really not sure I have any idea what you're asking here. So just some additional follow-up on getting some clarity around the slides. So I think we'll work with CSE, and we'll work on finding some ways to make sure that the information that we're presenting here is a bit more clear. And what we've done in past where we have had some slides that have been confusing is we can work with them. These are posted and available for folks to access today. And if we can find a way to kind of add some clarification to them, we'll send out a note to let folks know that we've updated the link on the page to a newer, more updated slideshow. And I do have a few more questions that have come in. Let's see. Some of these are just clarifying that, yes, the slides are available now on the website, and we can drop the link in the chat for where you can access. Oh, wait, are they available on the website right now? Actually, I should ask that question. Raquel, is that accurate? Have we posted all of them yet? Yes, okay. They are all available on the website now, and we will post in the chat that link. And again, we'll notify you if we post an updated slideshow. A substantive question here that isn't clarifying on process is from Erica Romero, and the question is, does this indicate that nonprofits are not effectively targeting minority populations?
It doesn't, to me, specifically. I mean, one thing I want to kind of clarify with this is that a lot of the community-based organization work is difficult to track. So the comments about this being kind of abstract, there's a reason for that. We have survey questions that talk about nonprofits generally, but our CBO work is specifically targeting priority populations and groups of interest. So this was kind of our best way of getting at that question, but I don't think that it indicates that anything about our CBOs not having efforts towards that group, or many groups. Does that, Jonathan, got a hand?
Yeah, I think the survey data is one snapshot of information that been noted that, and as folks have responded to, that takes some interpretation. And so first, I want to say thank you, Dailene, for prodding on that and making sure that the conclusion is a little clear. And I think that's gets to kind of Erica's point as well. But I'd say we have both quantitative and qualitative data in addition to the survey findings presented here about the role that our CBO partners have played in helping with access, which you'll hear a bit more too, but folks navigating myriad of programs to be able to maximize and optimize their rebate. And that is frequently for folks in communities of color. And there's additional information that can probably be brought to bear. There are additional surveys and results more generally about the program on the Cvrp website. But yeah, I would echo Ben's sentiment that I think there is other evidence that can be brought to bear about the role our community-based organizations are playing in diverse communities to increase participation. And we will work to make that story a little clearer than what we've presented here today.
We do have 2 more follow-up questions. Jonathan, you'll want to stay on. These are kind of, they're budget related. So from Piet Cannon, how much of the CSE CVRP marketing budget goes to support and partner with CVOs? And then follow up to that is there a larger plan to support CVO work in underserved communities to increase income qualified CVRP uptake?
Yeah, great questions. So at the first bit, 100% or close to it of the budget now is spent on outreach to the equity community, and more than half of that is now, I believe, through community-based organizations. And that number is increasing as we talked about with additional partners coming on. This is a space that we've seen and experienced that our community-based organizations are far and away the most effective at getting the word out and bringing people into the program, and not just our program, but also helping connect applicants with the other transportation equity incentives available. And I would be happy to follow up with more specifics on the dollar amounts if that is requested through Carb hereafter. I don't have that data at the handy, but we've made an intentional effort year over year to increase the CVO budget as a portion of the MENO. We've made an intentional effort to transition away from the general market, especially in years past where the general rebate was being oversubscribed, and really emphasize outreach and raising awareness about this and other incentives to priority populations.
And I'll add to that, you know, over the years with CVRP, we absolutely have made an intentional effort of kind of identifying as early back as the first funding we received for GGRF, making sure that we were setting aside funding to be able to support CVOs. And so this is kind of one of the first places that we did that with any of our incentive projects, making sure that we had funding that was flowing to those places. And then as the years have gone on, really broadening that scope and working with CSE to make sure that we are including as many of the right groups that we can that can be supportive and that are in the areas that we're trying to reach. And they do continue to make very significant efforts along those pathways that we built. So I have no additional questions that have come in the Q&A box. Aria?
It does look like we have one raised hand. Piet Cannon. Piet, I've unmuted your line.
Hi, everybody, it's Piet Cannon. I just had a follow-up to that, you know, in terms of like, you know, there's different levels of community-based organizations, and some of the ones that you characterized in the slides, you know, talk about like, you know, providing essential service to underrepresented community members, right? And those CBOs tend to be overburdened with their primary task. So I think, you know, it's great to have the survey data, but it's also would be great to have follow-up to see, like, you know, throughout the state of California, what can be done, you know, to work with those CBOs that are serving people, you know, for other needs like basic health needs, basic food needs, and other services, and how to increase their capacity to be able to talk about electric cars. So I don't know what the forum for that is, but that's just something I've noticed in the work that we do in the communities and working with, you know, we're a community-based organization, but we're focused on the environment. So when we go out to reach to other partners in the community, you know, they just often don't have the bandwidth to be able to add this one added item to their, you know, presentation to the underserved communities. So just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we would agree with a lot of that statement. Ben, can we scroll back up to the top of the presentation where we list some of our organizations? And I think we do try and find folks. For starters, the programs are all a little different and they're all complicated because we're trying to really focus who gets what. And that complexity means that it isn't something where it's intuitive necessarily, and it highlights the value of both our CBO partners, the partners that Grid through Access works with, as well as far as trying to demystify and decomplicate what is otherwise can be a very confusing space of trying to keep track of the state incentives versus utility incentives versus the federal bit. And you're right, I completely agree that this isn't necessarily for some of these folks their first and only priority. But I think that over time, and part of the reason it's important the investment is increasing is that it does take a significant amount of money to support the CBOs in order to support the program. They do not work for free, and they shouldn't. Provide an essential service. They have bills to pay as well, and they have other responsibilities. So it's about capacity building as much as of anything. And so I strongly agree that this program and other programs, Cvrp has, I think, one of the more robust CBO and community partner networks of the programs. Certainly in California and for all of our programs in other states as well, Cvrp is really, ahead of the game as far as the number and the commitment of resources to the CBO partners, in that they need that in order to really successfully support the program and have the resources to hire new staff, to take on some additional training, to bring on equipment. It's not something that happens overnight. And so I strongly agree with the sentiment that we should expand as a state, as Carb is looking at these programs, and that funding needs to be made available, absolutely, for the CBO on the kind of engagement and outreach, case management, helping folks through the process. That's a quintessential service that CBOs can currently and should in the future help not just the administrator CSE of Cvrp, but others as well. I think that's an excellent point.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan and Ben and Jen and everyone for your questions and comments on this portion of the workshop. We're now going to move on to our next portion. So let me get the presentation up here. All right. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit. And I'd like to turn it over to Mcneil Birch with Carb to kick off the update on Access Clean California.
Thank you and good afternoon, folks. My name is Mcneil Birch. I'm the staff lead for Access Clean California in Carb's Compliance Assistance and Outreach Branch. So this section of the workshop presentation, I'll be focusing on and my colleagues will be focusing on the progress that we've made to date with Access Clean California, and to also discuss the draft funding allocation and outlook for the upcoming fiscal year 22-23. So I'll start this section of the presentation with some quick background on Access Clean California before handing it off to my colleagues at Grid Alternatives, who are a grantee for administering this project, to give an update on what we've achieved so far in the funding allocated to date. And then I'll finish with an overview of what Carb staff is proposing for the allocation for this next fiscal year. At that point, we'll pause and open it up for to the public for comments and questions. I also just want to make a brief note on terminology so nobody gets confused. Throughout this presentation, you may hear us shorten the project name verbally to Access, and abbreviate in writing, as you can see here, as capital ACC, lowercase ESS, Access. So I want to make sure I'm clear on that front, and we'll get into the background. Okay, so beginning as a priority recommendation of both the CEC's SB 350 Low Income Barrier Study and Carb's SB 350 guidance document, Access Clean California takes a multidimensional approach to outreach with the ultimate goal of streamlining access to and also coordinating outreach for the state's clean transportation and clean energy consumer-based equity projects. While a long-term goal for Access Clean California is to be a multi-agency platform, in the near term, the pilot project focused on Carb's clean vehicle purchase incentive projects, including Clean Cars for All, the two financing assistance projects, as well as Cvrp, and also other programs already built into Access Clean California, like the CPUC's DAC/SASH low-income solar program that Grid Alternatives administers as well. So via competitive solicitation in 2018, Carb chose Grid Alternatives to administer the project. And to date, Carb has allocated a total of 14 million to Access Clean California. And that started with 5 million in VW settlement funding in fiscal year 17-18 to initiate development. Carb allocated additional funding in fiscal year 19-20, another 5 million, and more recently in fiscal year 21-22, 4 million. And the grant for this last allocation in fiscal year 21-22, that was just executed in last April, so we're just getting going with that grant. So I think with that background, now's a good chance to pass it over to Taria Mcgovern from Grid Alternatives and her colleagues to give their update on the project. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. I'll get my screen shared here. Just make sure that colleagues are on. Zach and Tracy and James are with me today. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taria Mcgovern. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Clean Mobility Programs at Grid Alternatives. And I've been managing Access Clean California, formerly known as the One Stop Shop Pilot Project, since 2018. Today, we're going to give you a quick review of the pilot and our strategies, and then I'll pass it over to Tracy and James to go over the main two parts of what Nick has called our multi-dimensional program now, which is focusing on outreach and then our case management side of our work. I'm going to speak kind of fast because we're going to try to keep as much time for questions as possible as well.
Taria, before
Yes.
you go on, I don't know if it's just on my end, but I can't see your slides.
Oh, you
It's
can't
just
see them?
showing like a small bar right now.
Oh no. Okay, let me try again. Is that better?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, this is the agenda, and we'll get into the pilot to program. So just a quick retro from 2018 to date. As Nick mentioned, we come out of the SB 350 barrier studies. Part A was led by the California Energy Commission, and Part B was led by Carb. And in both of the barrier studies reports, it was mentioned it was recommended to have a one-stop shop for programs, comprehensive outreach plans, and better collaboration with trusted community-based organizations for outreach. So Access Clean California is trying to and has been operationalizing these recommendations. So our first year, 2018 and 2019, we really have been focusing on CARB-funded clean transportation incentives for individuals. And in phase one, we were able to bring in complementary programs like charging and ensuring that charging infrastructure was being included in not only the benefits finder experience, but also including the ability to ensure that charging was actually being taken up within the programs. And then because we're Grid Alternatives, solar has always been a part of the conversation, ensuring that folks are charging their vehicles with renewable energy. And then we're trying to ensure that shared mobility options are also as accessible as possible through our experience. So really calling out our community car share in Sacramento, and then Blue LA down in Los Angeles, and then continuing to listen to our outreach partner network that tells us about new shared mobility programs that spring up almost every day. And so phase two, as we move into this program phase and out of this pilot phase, we really want to continue to build on this comprehensive experience and ensuring that folks can at least learn as much about the programs that they may be eligible for in one experience, but also, and what comes out of the barrier study report is also ensuring that folks are able to apply once and stack as many programs together as well. Our communities many times don't have the privilege to take this piecemeal approach to building this quilt of climate resiliency. So as much as we can, when folks are learning about electric vehicles, we want them to learn about charging, we want them to learn about solar and other energy efficiency programs that might help them reduce their utility bills and honestly make them more climate resilient, as they are many times on the front lines of climate change. So just some pilot highlights. I'm not going to read all of this. Y'all have access to our slides. Two things that I do like to call out in this slide is really taking this universal human-centered design approach. We're trying to ensure that through Access Clean California, we're able to ensure that folks with the greatest barriers to accessing these programs are able to use our benefits finder and also learn about our programs. So working with outreach partners like the Native American Environmental Protection Coalition that reaches 44 different tribal communities, federally recognized and non-federally recognized, to ensure that they're able to understand that these benefits are out here for them to engage with. So we really want to ensure that we're listening to our communities and then designing any technology, but also designing just our approach to implementing this program. And then something that was really fun before the pandemic was having quarterly convenings. It was so amazing to have such a diverse stakeholder group of our Carb staff leads in one room, our program administrators in that same room, and our community-based organizations all in the same room talking about how these programs could be more accessible to communities. Phase one, you can't kind of talk about 2020 without going through the global pandemic. We learned a lot in 2020, and one thing that we had to listen to from our community-based organizations and our outreach partner network was that we had to keep in mind Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So that year, a lot of things changed around outreach and marketing, and we wanted to ensure that our communities were receiving the care that they needed in that moment, and sometimes it was receiving transportation, but many times it was receiving food, receiving assistance to the hospital, just trying to understand how they could get their, how they could get PPE so they can continue to work. So 2020 was a really, really scary time, and also a great time to learn from our community-based organizations on how to continue to deliver on our contract, but also how we could ensure that we were centering communities' needs and what they needed to prioritize at that time. 2021, we were still all in Zoom. I will say I haven't met all of my team in person to date, which is scary, but also really interesting to be living in 2022 where work could continue. But one of the most successful things that I could say was just a really great feeling was actually piloting our centralized income verification process. And what we're trying to do is, like I said, with the barrier study, is ensure folks can prove that they are poor once and receive as many benefits as possible. So we have continued to build on that pilot into this year, and James will speak more about that in a little bit. I think with that, I'll pass it over to Zach to speak more about this phase 2 interagency collaboration that we're moving into.
Thanks, Taria. Yeah, I'm Zach Franklin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Grid Alternatives. And so, you know, I think going back to the sort of SB 350 barriers reports and the genesis of this project, I think what we've been hearing from communities throughout the state for many years now is that, you know, separate from all the different agencies who run different parts of this ecosystem, they really want to be able to go to one place and get direct access to all the money they're eligible for, and ideally not have to prove that they're poor, low, or low income over and over again. So really that requires interagency collaboration. So a lot of the work that has been going on to date is highlighted here. It's not comprehensive, but some of the main categories include coordination with the low carbon fuel standard programs. You know, these are funds that come from Carb, but ultimately are implemented by utilities in California, many of which are stackable with Carb's EV equity programs for, you know, new EVs, used EVs, EV charging, electrical upgrades, different aspects of what communities need to make the transition to electric vehicles, specifically through the holdback credit program. And so I think that there's the holdback credits are particularly focused on equity, but there's also the statewide California Clean Fuel Rewards non-equity program, where there's some opportunities to collaborate with that program to deepen equity impacts as well. So that's one big area of focus in terms of interagency collaboration, particularly going forward, as the California Public Utilities Commission approves many of the pending utility holdback credit spending programs. At the California Public Utilities Commission, there's also a really exciting project going on to create a universal application system for some of the critical climate equity programs run by the state's investor-owned utilities, the ESAN Care programs, Energy Savings Assistance Program, and the discounted utility rates program for income qualified consumers. There's basically a process that's going to be undertaken to create a very similar type of streamlined platform so that folks can sign up for all of these programs in a single location. And so there's some really exciting opportunities to make sure that Access Clean California and that project are kind of closely connected and integrated in terms of being able to expand the benefits that folks can get in both directions. Folks who are participating in Carb's EV equity programs can then get energy efficiency and discounted utility rates for lower charging, and vice versa. As part of that process, there's also a really exciting opportunity around income verification in terms of collaboration with both CPUC and the California Department of Social Services, which is building a centralized income verification hub primarily for the CalFresh and CalWorks programs, but there's an opportunity to work on an interagency basis to open that up so that Carb's EV equity programs can also benefit from that platform, which among other things is going to have direct access to some public data at the Franchise Tax Board to be able to reduce the amount of private financial information that participants have to provide. So another exciting aspect of that collaboration. And then the third that I'll call out is with the California Energy Commission. Obviously, electric vehicle is only helpful if you have a place to plug it in. Most of the charging infrastructure funding at the state of California is at the Energy Commission and not at Carb. So working very closely with a variety of programs at the Energy Commission to make sure these efforts are coordinated when they get rolled out into priority communities throughout the state. This includes the Energize program, which is for medium and heavy duty charging infrastructure, Communities in Charge program, which is for light duty charging infrastructure, as is the Cali VIP 2.0 program. So there's two parallel programs that tie in very naturally with Carb's light duty EV equity programs. There's also the Energy Commission's Ideal Communities program, which is an effort to do outreach and stakeholder engagement across the Energy Commission's program. So working closely with that team at the Energy Commission. And then new programs that are kind of being proposed that have very natural connections to Carb's programs around equitable at-home charging that really build on some of the work that Carb's been able to do to date in terms of incorporating charging into EV equity programs on the vehicle side of things. So this is not comprehensive, but this is sort of a highlight of the main areas of interagency collaboration that Access Clean California has been focused on to date and is prioritizing for the months ahead.
Thanks, Zach. With that, I will pass it over to Tracy. And Tracy, I'll try to time your pauses with going to the next slide, but if you want to say next slide, that's fine too.
Sounds great. Thanks, Taria. Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy Ruiz, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm the Outreach Program Manager for Access Clean California, working with all of our partnerships. So first of all, I would like to talk about how we have modeled a needs-based approach by working with trusted community organizations and institutions since we started the pilot back in 2019. And we have now built it, scaled it, and built it to be an outreach partner network. That's what we refer to it as. We went from working with 4 organizations to now having 23 organizations as part of this outreach partner network. We have diversified the types of outreach partnerships that we have with all of these organizations. And we have created a communications network for sharing information, challenges, and best practices amongst our outreach partners. We have also consolidated education and outreach materials that are culturally and linguistically reflective of the diverse communities that our outreach partners work in, thanks to the feedback and input of our partners on what is needed to effectively engage their communities. We have also piloted and launched a technical assistance and capacity building pilot for community organizations where we learned a lot of lessons and we hope to continue to build upon in the next year. And lastly, we developed equity-centric evaluation standards to measure the efficacy of our outreach partnerships in a way that's both quantitative and qualitative to make sure that our partners are highlighting, some of the needs and challenges that they're hearing from their communities in order for them to access clean transportation and clean energy programs. Next slide. Awesome. So in terms of the communications network, we have consolidated program updates in a way that's easily accessible by our partners in order to communicate program status, timelines, requirements to effectively apply for these programs for our partners to communicate with their communities and their audiences. We have also created spaces to amplify the community's input and feedback regarding program design, funding, and regulations as well, and working with teams at Carb to create feedback loops for our partners to understand where their feedback and amplification of their community's voices were taken into account to help shape some of these things. Another thing that we have built in terms of our communications network is the resource hub, where we host training and program materials that our partners can easily access to train their own staff, but also to provide their communities with more information and education around these programs. We have created tons of marketing resources in different languages, thanks to the feedback of our partners on what is necessary in order for them to effectively engage with their communities. We have also implemented a monthly newsletter where we're able to share grant opportunities for our partners so that they can bring more resources and programs into their communities as well. And lastly, we have also created a community outreach calendar where our partners are able to report on previous or upcoming events or efforts that they are taking, that they are going to partake in, to create transparency on the type of outreach efforts that our partners are engaging in, but also to encourage peer-to-peer learning from one another based on their efforts. Something that may have been successful in the Central Valley could potentially be replicated as well in the Imperial Valley or in tribal communities. So that is it in terms of the communications network. If we can go to the next slide. So this right here is a map or more of a visual for you all in terms of where our outreach network is currently taking place. This is the expanded outreach network for through 2022 right now. And if we can go to the next slide. You can see that we work with many different types of organizations, including climate justice and equity partners, trusted CBOs, Native American communities and sovereign nations, and also California's largest labor union, SEIU. If we can go to the next slide. One key thing to take away from these 23 different partnerships is that each one has a tailored and curated approach to outreach, and every outreach strategy is specific to the priority communities of the partner and their priority audiences. What that means is essentially that a one-size-fits-all approach would not happen or would not be effective if that's the route we would take. So each partner we've had conversations with to make sure that we are engaging in strategies that will resonate with our community members and that will be effective. One thing that we're actually really excited about that's going to actually be launching later on this year is the Student Ambassador Outreach Program through our partnership with the Foundation for California Community Colleges, where we're going to have student-to-student outreach and education around the clean transportation programs that are available to them throughout the state. Another strategy that's also taking place through our partnership with Ecology Action serving the Central Coast is through their EV purchase guidance program, where they have cohorts of community volunteers that are providing one-on-one support for community members to access these clean transportation programs using Access Clean California's benefits finder. And lastly, by working with organizations like People for Mobility Justice and Latino Roundtable to really amplify a community-centered input and feedback on the design and implementation of clean energy and clean transportation programs that will impact their local communities. We can go to the next slide. And in terms of target communities, for 2022, we identified outreach gaps that were aligning with program funding and geographic reach within the hardest to reach communities, including tribal and rural communities, low-income communities, and disadvantaged communities. And we used our Access Clean California equity metrics to help identify these gaps in our overall outreach strategy, which essentially just reinforce the need to continue expanding our outreach partner network. And I will say we will continue to work with the California Resources Board to continue to identify target communities and priority communities that we're not reaching, to continue to expand our outreach partner network into those regions and communities as well. But as you can see here, by identifying those gaps, overall, we were able to expand into working with folks like CCAC in the Central Valley, Comité Cívico del Valle in Imperial Valley, South Consol focusing on the San Joaquin Valley specifically, Latino Latina Roundtable in the Inland Empire, and lastly, working with the Social Justice Learning Institute in South Los Angeles, connecting directly with the Black community. And that is it basically from my end. I will go ahead and pass it over to James to talk about the application process.
Thanks, Tracy. Good afternoon, everybody. Excuse me if my voice is a little raspy. My name is James Cunningham. I'm the Director of Community Care at Grid Alternatives, he, him pronouns. And I'm going to be going through an overview today of the second strategy for Access Clean California around streamlining the application process. And so as we go into the next slide, just want to take a step back to reiterate some things that were surfaced during the barrier study, which is that, we do all this work and put in all this effort and intention into outreach. And then once folks are sort of getting into the door, if the application process is very onerous and difficult to navigate and to get through, then that is a barrier to adoption of these incentives and adoption of electric vehicles that also needs to be addressed. So some of those specific barriers were around people having to duplicate steps. We've heard that around income verification, but it applies to other parts of the application as well. Long wait times as a result of the applications, a lot of back and forth between clients and program administrators trying to get applications completed. And then also just, we've even heard stories of people sort of giving up on their opportunity at the incentive because the application process was either taking too long or was too challenging. And then folks then just went out and bought an ICE vehicle instead of pursuing an electric vehicle. So that's where the importance of this application process being streamlined really comes into play. And sort of our intention and approach is to reduce the friction for the applicants. So the first step in that is to have this simple, intuitive, and easy to use benefits finder. So we can help folks find all the programs they're eligible for and start their applications. As Taria mentioned earlier, we began with the Carb programs, but we're also beginning to list other related electric vehicle incentives, including from CCAs or local utilities, to be featured on there as well, so people can see everything that they're eligible for in one place. And then for those programs that are partnered with Access Clean California, we can help them begin their applications. And that's where the second bullet point comes in around having a seamless application experience sort of across programs. And in order to achieve this, what we learned during our pilot was that one thing is very important is close collaboration with program administrators. Centralized income verification was a big piece of it. That was part of the pilot we'll discuss in a moment to sort of tackle one of the most challenging parts about the application process, and particularly not having to ask people to repeat that step if they're applying to multiple programs. And also doing work to proactively facilitate the stacking of incentives and sort of taking responsibility for supporting clients to make sure that that's happening. And then that also, all that to sort of make it work includes back-end case management, support from Access Clean California, as well as tracking efforts both within Access Clean California and across programs that we're referring people to and connecting people to. So ideally, we'll be able to see the outcomes of those applications. So that's just a high level of some of the things we were trying to approach here and what went into it. But if we go to the next slide, we actually have a brief video that sort of summarizes this approach. So Taria, I'll turn it to you.
Pollution and climate change are having a big impact on our communities. California has many programs to help people with low and moderate incomes switch to clean energy like electric cars and solar panels. These programs can reduce pollution and save you money on your transportation and electricity bills. Meet Alma and her family. They have an old, inefficient car that's no good for their wallet or the planet. Alma wishes she could afford something cleaner and more reliable, but she assumes electric vehicles are out of her reach and doesn't have time to do a lot of research. Access Clean California is here to help. We show people like Alma what clean energy benefits are available and get their application started in one easy place. Our benefits finder is simple and straightforward and guides users through every step. Alma can see all the money she's eligible for and all the other benefits she can get. And she can start applying right away from our secure application form. Soon, Alma and her family will be saving money and helping their community breathe easier. With Access Clean California, you can too. Get started today at accesscleanca.org and help transition to a cleaner California.
Great, thank you, Tria. You can go to the next slide. There we go, thank you. So wanted to drill into specifically the centralized income verification pilot that we started in 2021. And some of our goals around this, I think first and foremost, are to make income verification easier for our communities by minimizing the burden of proof on them. And I want to emphasize this does not mean decreasing the rigor of the application process, but really what we found is that it was just the actual process of submitting income documents, going through the back and forth with program administrators. It was one of the most challenging and difficult parts of the process. So there is this thread where we don't want to ask people to, as Tria says, prove that they're poor more than once and be repeatedly sort of questioning people around this. But also if that process is difficult and just burdensome, it pushes people away from the programs. So we wanted to set that intention from the human-centered design perspective from the very beginning, that we're here to serve the applicant, and making the process easier on them is definitely one of our goals. And that also includes making the application process faster as a whole. So we found it was very common for people to be waiting, at least 2 or 3 months to get approved for programs. And as I mentioned earlier, that was causing some people to just drop out of the process entirely. So our goal was to make this process faster by automating as much of the process as we could. But also, it's not just technology here that we were using, it's also human intervention to make sure we're proactively tracking people's applications and trying to get them unstuck whenever somebody is stalled for one reason or another. And then lastly, we found, again, it's very important to have a seamless, in order to have a seamless experience, we need to have effective handoff processes from Access Clean California to the program administrators of the programs we're connecting people to. So there's a lot that goes into that, but we can only do so much at Access Clean California. And if we don't have good relationships with program administrators to have a nice, effective handoff, then the applicant can end up getting stuck in a new way. So there's the potential actually to have an unintended barrier that's created by centralizing if you don't have an effective handoff to each of those programs. So that was something we learned very quickly, and we tried everything we could to have effective solutions to that, and we sort of have to approach that on a program by program basis. Next slide, please. So just to recap some of the key lessons learned from that pilot, again, reiterating that you have to put the applicant first in the process design. We're at the end of the day in this for the people and trying to make these programs more accessible for people. So centering that applicant in the design of the process is very key. Not sort of designing a process and then working backwards to try to retrofit that process when problems arise. It's really sort of from the ground up, having that human-centered design approach into the operation of the application experience. And that includes being actively or proactively responsive to feedback that we're hearing from clients. Sometimes if you hear one thing or twice, you hear something once or twice, it's a coincidence, but if you hear it 3 times, it's a pattern, right? So we're trying to help sure we're getting, make sure we're getting people through their applications. But then if we're hearing the same issues over and over again from clients, then that's something we want to go back to our system and try to address from that level as well. So we have to leave room in our operation to kind of iterate on the application experience and make improvements. And that includes getting feedback from clients and applicants, but also from outreach partners on the project. Because they're working directly with people going through the application process, and they can often see the same struggles that folks are experiencing. So we really have to be proactively responsive to that feedback and work to incorporate it into the application system. In terms of our relationship with program administrators, we also learned it's important when we have this handoff to program administrators, we don't want to have a manual handoff wherever possible. We need to have something automated and have our systems talk to each other, but it needs to be technologically simple. And we need to have those, the ability to send applications to program administrators and then receive status updates back from program administrators. And the second point is really key because it allows us to track the effectiveness of the centralized application platform that we're working to build, and make sure, most importantly, that applicants are able to stack incentives when they're eligible for that, and also monitor where people might be dropping out of the process so that we can uncover why that might be happening, and continue to refine the process. And then lastly, a lot of that is related to technology and systems and operations. But at the end of the day, it really makes a big difference to just have direct communication channels between the Access Clean California case management team and each program administrator's case management team. Because at the end of the day, both of our respective teams are working to help people with their processes. And so we just need to be in touch with each other and able to support whenever somebody might be getting stuck. So yeah, this is the last slide for me. I won't read each of these quotes out loud, but I just wanted to sort of feature these to reiterate this idea that these programs are for the people, and we're really seeking to center the people in the processes that we're designing, helping people choose and stack their programs, guide them through that process in partnership with outreach partners, work together with outreach partners and program administrators to help people who get stuck, and listen to applicants when they're giving us feedback and find ways to incorporate that whenever we can. So I think that's it for this section. And from there, I'll pass it to Nick.
All right. Thank you very much, James and team. That was excellent. I've got one more slide here. Okay, we'll bring up shortly, and then we'll get to questions in a little bit. So just looking forward to the next fiscal year after that update. For fiscal year 22-23, Carb staff is considering a draft allocation of $5 million to continue scaling up implementation of Access Clean California, continue expanding the network of outreach partners and filling outreach gaps through targeted outreach in priority communities across the state. These efforts will continue to ensure Carb is raising awareness and providing effective outreach in priority communities through trusted outreach partners, with a particular emphasis on targeting and increasing participation via the benefits finder from communities who face the greatest barriers and are underrepresented in participation data to date. Also, the draft funding allocation would support developing a pathway for any interested applicant to access the benefits finder as a complement to the project's existing, as we just heard, case management and more targeted facilitated use model. While the project would continue to emphasize outreach in underrepresented communities, the new pathway would allow Access Clean California Benefits Finder to help a broader audience. So the draft allocation would also be used to continue leveraging Access Clean California to improve community engagement in general and facilitate community input and feedback from the communities on Carb's incentive programs and more broadly on regulations as well, to make sure we're getting a very good equity perspective. I believe Access Clean California is very well positioned to this with their outreach partner network. Finally, I just want to point out that since we've already had 3 fiscal years of funding allocated to date, the draft funding allocation would need to be awarded via a competitive solicitation. So with that, I'll open it up for comments and questions. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Nick and Grid team. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start calling on raised hands, in an effort to allow as many people to ask questions or state comments as possible, we are asking that you keep your comment or question as brief as possible. If you have a longer comment or question, we are happy to meet with you outside of this workshop to discuss your questions or comments in greater detail. You can use the Zoom feature to raise your hand. For those of you participating by phone, press pound or #2 to raise your hand. When you're called on, please state your name and affiliation. First up, we have Eileen Tutt. Eileen, I have unmuted your mic.
Thanks, Aria. This is Eileen Tutt with the California Electric Transportation Coalition. A couple of questions, one for Zach. You mentioned the low carbon fuel standard funding. My understanding, and I'm pretty familiar with that program, is that on the holdback equity amounts, the CPUC, and I just want to give a huge shout out to GRID and Carb and the Energy Commission, because not only are these programs really awesome, but I just feel like you guys are continually trying to improve them. And it is definitely essential given how difficult it is to reach into these communities and ensure the benefits in communities. So really appreciate that. I do not feel the same way about the CPUC. And I can say that now. I will just tell you that the equity holdback money has been held up, as far as I can tell, for over 2 years now. So when you list it on this kind of an outreach effort, and we take it into the communities, and many of the CBOs do, people think the money's available, and then they find out it's not. And that is extremely bad from an outreach perspective. It makes it look like we're talking about programs, but guess what? They're not accessible to you. So I just want to say that we need all the help we can get from GRID, from Carb, from the Energy Commission to unlock that money, which has been sitting there, applications for over 2 years now without approval. And that makes absolutely no sense given how far behind we are on reaching and on equitable solutions to this challenge. So Zach, I want to just say, please reach out to me. I would like to help you, and I would like your help because I am beyond frustrated. I mean, this is millions of dollars that are being held up for purely bureaucratic reasons. There's just no reason not to allow this funding to get into these communities. And so I just want to say that, and Zach, I know you unmuted, so I'll let you respond, but I also want to reach out to you again offline because it's embarrassing at this point. It's embarrassing for me professionally, and it ought to be embarrassing for the CPUC.
Yeah, thanks, Eileen, and definitely let's connect offline. There's a lot of complexity, in all of the interagency work. Just to clarify your point, none of these interagency programs are in any of the public-facing, outreach stuff. Anything that's not already currently up and running. Basically, we're presenting this here in terms of the progress of the project behind the curtain. But yeah, we're not doing any outreach about programs that don't exist yet to anything consumer-facing. So just to make sure that's super clear. And I will say good news is that of the 3 major investor-owned utilities, PG&E's proposal for their holdback credit programs was approved earlier this year. So we're just waiting on CPUC approval for Southern California Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric. But even then, with the approvals, they have to roll out the underlying programs, of which there are several on each. So it's very complicated. Definitely looking forward to connecting with you offline, but just wanted to make those 2 points that at least the PG&E money has been approved, and none of the programs that have been launched yet are doing any of our public-facing, kind of consumer-facing outreach efforts. This is purely behind the curtain. Thanks for your comments.
And I just want to say that after 2 years, the PG&E proposal was approved and the others haven't been approved. And we're talking about just the equity programs. So just so you know, the non-equity programs are all rolling, but the equity programs are being held up. That is a huge challenge for us optically. And I also, I guess I want to say for this one-stop shop, maybe we could just put it in the chat, but I'm really struggling to find a place, and I just think if anybody can do it, GRID can, but to find a place where we can send information about the incentives that are available in these communities to particularly priority communities. And I want to say in particular the predominantly Black communities, these communities, I mean, I noticed they're not in your list. You have tribal, you have rural. I will just tell you that the predominantly Black communities are way behind in terms of education and outreach, understanding what we're trying to do here, and even access to incentives and programs. And so I think we need to add that to your list when you say, because I just feel like in addition to the only other communities that are close are tribal communities, which are also been disproportionately left behind. But can you, if you can, just put in the chat the link to kind of the one-stop shop. So when we send information out about the existing programs, not the ones that may exist in the future if the PUC ever approves the programs, but other programs, we would really appreciate it, because it's just one of the top asked questions is what incentives am I eligible for? And it's extremely confusing. So, and I didn't even know there was a resource, but I'm really, really glad that grid is running it, and I hope you get approved for another 3 years. If you need a letter, let me know.
Can I just add one thing, Eileen? Thanks for the comments and the positive feedback. Our first round of creating our equity metrics with Greenlining Institute, when we had identified in 2018 and 2019, we identified tribal and rural communities as our priority communities. And this year, just due to the conversations that have come up, and then also recognizing the data that is out there, we are identifying Black communities on top of that. So we never take folks out, we just keep adding. So I will say that as a Black person, the electric vehicle market hasn't been a market that has been easy to engage within. Transportation and driving is really different for the Black community through our generational experiences and recognizing that we have generationally had to buy vehicles to escape domestic terrorism. So having vehicles come out that are smaller and not as fast kind of may not trigger consciously, but subconsciously, we needed faster vehicles in the past to get out of sundown towns when traveling, and we needed larger vehicles in the past to be able to sleep in them when we were in places where there weren't hotels where we could stay. So just recognizing that it's more than just basic outreach and marketing that needs to happen to the Black community. There's a lot of other factors that come into play as it comes into play with all the other ethnicities and races that live in this country and live in the state of California, but in particular the Black community and our relationship with transportation is a very nuanced and intersectional one. So I will say that if you haven't read or listened to Driving While Black, definitely give it a listen or read, because it really goes into why we have such a nuanced and intersectional experience when it comes to our transportation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. We do not have any more raised hands.
We do have, everyone, this is Tabitha Willman. We do have a question in the Q&A from Tim Tyner. Are other agencies like the California Energy Commission and or utilities helping fund the program phase of access? Nick, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I think that's an excellent question. The short answer is no, but hopefully the longer answer is not yet. We have been in discussions, as Zach sort of started or talked about, just in connecting with all the different programs. We have been having the discussions of how we can get longer term funding from the various agencies or utilities that are funding these projects, and that's really for like the longer term, meeting that longer term goal and the longer term viability of this project is making sure that as a multi-agency platform, we're having multi-agency input. And I think so we are having those conversations. I think also it's not just is there money available, it's also the mechanism, how do we get that money from one agency to the other, two things we all have to think about. But hopefully soon we will, and that's something we're working on, but not yet.
I don't see any other questions from Q&A or from hands raised on the participants. So Raquel, we kick it back over to you.
Yeah, we will move on. Again, we will have some additional time at the end of today if there's any additional comments or questions that pop up on access. But thank you, Grid, thank you, Tab, and Nick for that presentation. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next portion of our workshop, and I will be providing an overview of staff's draft proposal for funding splits for light duty vehicle purchase incentive programs, followed by a discussion of the priorities over the next few fiscal years. So this slide here shows staff's draft proposed funding splits for our light duty vehicle purchase incentives. We recognize that budget conversations are ongoing, and we have developed this draft proposal based on the governor's May revised budget that is intended to cover multiple years and included a total of $76 million from the Low Carbon Transportation Fund and a total of $430 million from the General Fund, equaling $506 million for equity vehicle purchase incentive efforts. This included at least $250 million to establish Clean Cars for All statewide, at least $50 million for the district-run Clean Cars for All programs, at least $100 million for statewide financing assistance, and at least $15 million for the new electric bicycles incentive program. If the final budget looks different than what was in the May revise, we will hold a separate work group to discuss our updated proposal before it is finalized. So again, this table does outline the proposed allocations for each vehicle purchase incentive program, considering current project demand and uptake, administrator capacity to spend funds, and funding that has already been allocated in past fiscal years but has not yet been spent. Carb staff considered stakeholder comments received through the public process and prioritized investments that can result in the most immediate impact in communities. As a reminder, Cvrp's fiscal year 2021-22 allocation was a multi-year allocation, so no funding is included for the program in this proposal. For the statewide expansion of Clean Cars for All, staff is proposing an allocation of $250 million from general fund allocation. Additionally, staff is proposing to allocate a total of $110 million for district-run Clean Cars for All programs, with $60 million coming from Low Carbon Transportation Fund and $50 million coming from the general fund allocation. For financing assistance, staff is proposing an allocation of $110 million from the general fund allocation. For e-bikes, staff is proposing a $15 million allocation from the general fund. And as Nick just mentioned, for Access Clean California, staff is proposing an allocation of $5 million from the Low Carbon Transportation allocation. New for this year, staff is proposing to support the payment issuance strategy and demonstrations currently being developed by the California Integrated Travel Project, or CAL-ITP. This is an effort by the California State Transportation Agency, Caltrans, and other partners. Specifically, this project seeks to ensure that any transit customer, and specifically underbanked and unbanked customers, can easily pay for transit by accepting Europay, MasterCard, and Visa open loop payments. As this effort will support various projects across Carb's light duty vehicle incentive projects, staff is proposing to allocate $5 million from the general fund allocation towards the CAL-ITP payment issuance strategy and demonstrations project. Lastly, staff is proposing to hold the remaining $11 million in low carbon transportation funding in an equity vehicle purchase incentive reserve fund that will be available should any of our equity vehicle purchase incentive programs exhaust their allocation and show a need for additional funding. As a reminder, only 75% of the $76 million in proposed low carbon transportation funding can be spent initially, with the remaining 25% available after the fourth cap and trade auction of the fiscal year and with direction from the Department of Finance. As such, staff is proposing to hold back the $11 million in the reserve funding and $8 million from the $60 million in low carbon transportation funding for Clean Cars for All district programs until the fourth cap and trade auction of the fiscal year. So before we move on to talk about our priorities and longer term vision for these programs, I did want to take a pause here to see if there were any questions about these proposed funding splits. Again, this is based off the governor's May revised budget and is subject to change pending final budget action. Arya, are there any raised hands?
There are. But before we go into those, I just want to remind everyone that before I start calling on raised hands, in an effort to allow as many people to ask questions or state comments as possible, We are asking that you keep your comment or question as brief as possible. If you have a longer comment or question, we are happy to meet with you outside of this workshop to discuss your questions or comments in greater detail. You can use the Zoom feature to raise your hand. For those of you participating by phone, press pound or #2 to raise your hand. When you're called on, please state your name and affiliation. First up, we have Chris Chavez. Chris, I have unmuted your mic.
Yes, thank you. This is Chris Chavez with Coalition for Clean Air, as well as the Charge Ahead campaign. Seeing the allocation, the out of the low carbon transportation allocation to the Clean Cars for All district programs, I think it certainly helps a little bit of the concern that we saw earlier, in which we only had a $50 million allocation being proposed. However, we still have very strong major concerns about the proposed statewide expansion as envisioned by Carb. We still have not, and from the plans that we've seen, the plan does not address any of the concerns we outlined about the viability of expanded Cvrp, the joint solicitation of Cvrp, what this would do to existing programs. And I know later on in the presentation, it suggests consolidating programs, which is very concerning, especially given the community partnerships that currently exist. We still feel that the $250 million for statewide expansion is a lot of money to throw at a program that doesn't exist yet. And ultimately, we're concerned about how, what this rush to statewide expansion could do to the existing programs. We're not opposed to expansion. We've supported it in the past. We want to make sure that the communities that are really need help getting over transportation barriers are able to access these programs. But we continue to feel that Carb has not responded to any of our concerns. In fact, I know that Carb hasn't directly responded to Charge Ahead's concerns. You did respond to the Budget Committee's concern, forwarding our concerns to you, and sent that response to the Budget Committee, but not to us directly, which we viewed as really some level of disrespect. So certainly want to express these concerns at this forum here, and we'll continue to express them.
Thank you for your comments, Chris. I'll open it up if anybody on the Carb team has anything they would like to say in response.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties and I couldn't unmute my mic. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for the comments. Do appreciate it. And, again, our budget here reflects what's in the administration's proposal as part of the May revise. And so the $250 million allocation, again, that's something that's been laid out by the administration that we're being responsive to, and do plan, and as you know, are doing our best to try to build what we think these programs would look like and how they would all fit together. I want to ask, for sake of not too much of a back and forth for a time, but I'm not sure where we haven't been responsive. I think we've been trying to be as responsive as possible to the questions and the concerns that you guys are laying out. This is the first opportunity that we've really had to be able to lay these numbers out for you guys to see. Although I think, we've tried to be clear from the beginning that we had the low carbon transportation funds and we're trying to figure out the right allocation for how to break those out. And I'm glad to see that the numbers are moving more in the direction that you're comfortable with, but I'd love to understand more about which specific things we haven't responded to, so we can make sure that we do respond for you.
Well, on May 19th, we sent a letter to Carb staff, to the legislature, to the governor's office. We never received acknowledgement from Carb of that letter. However, the legislative committees did send it to Carb staff, and they received a response in rebutting our letter. And that is really where a lot of the frustration lies, in terms of the feeling that we are not getting a response from Carb when there has been a formal response drafted, not to us, but to the legislature.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much for the background there, and I'll connect back with the team so we can figure out what else we might need to follow up with you on with regard to that. And we're happy to continue that conversation and meet and talk through the issues more.
And this is Anthony Poju, the lead staff for Clean Cars for All. Chris, we are going to be posting some FAQs on our website that I think you'll find that are very responsive to your concerns. And when those do go up, I'll make sure to send you a link so that you're aware. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everyone. Next up, we have Jonathan Changus. Jonathan, please unmute your mic.
Great, thank you. Jonathan Changus with the Center for Sustainable Energy. Clarifying question was just the time frame with which these dollars were expected to fund the programs. Is it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Is it anticipated this is the amount? Just getting some temporal clarification would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So the budget, it all depends on how things are written in the budget. Traditionally, as you know, base budget ends up offering us, a 1 year to encumber and 2 years to spend the dollars. But with a lot of our funds through these programs, we've been very fortunate to have longer encumbrance and longer liquidation deadlines, which allows us, more time to really make sure that we're thinking through how the dollars get spent, and gives us the proper time we need to get the dollars under grant, get the grant programs open, and so forth. So I believe that the current budget that passed does have the elongated timeframes, and so we should have 2 years to encumber these funds and 4 years to expend the funds. But I know that there's a lot more work being done in the legislature on the budget, and there's, until the budget's final, it's a little hard to say. Our goal is always, and our goal especially given that a lot of these funds are accelerated funds to help fund getting ZEVs on the road as quickly as possible. Our goal really truly is to get the funds into the programs as quick as we can. And that's why we're working as hard as we can to try to get solicitations out the door. And we've got our solicitation that recently closed that we're working through for electric bikes. We've got the solicitation that we're developing for financing assistance and for Clean Cars for All. And we want to have those done and ready so that when the funds are available to us, we can start to really manage those programs and get those programs open as soon as possible. There is a caveat to that, which I think a lot of folks on this call know, but for those that are newer to these conversations, there is still a bureaucratic process, and we've got to kind of go through those steps. But this is a priority for us. This is where we've got a lot of our resources invested, and the staff really doing the work to get the dollars to the programs as soon as we've got them, and get the programs, those especially that are closed. But even still keeping those that are open and not running into delays and wait list situations. So we're working as fast as we can.
Thanks for that, Lisa.
Aria, before you go back to hands really quick, I've got a couple of questions that have come in the Q&A box. One in particular I want to respond to very quickly. Hector Castillo asks, is there funding available for drayage, Port of LA trucks, natural gas fuel, or CNG engines? So today we're really focused on light duty. There are lots of conversations about the heavy duty space taking place on long-term heavy duty investments and incentives through our HVIP program. And so Hector, we can definitely send you information for those meetings and those conversations. But today we're really focused on light duty, not drayage and not port trucks or natural gas. Aria, I'll kick back to you for now.
Thanks, Lisa. Next up, we have Levi Tillman. Levi, I have unmuted your mic.
Yes, this is Matt Mcgovern. I'm with Ample as well, filling in for Levi today. Is this the time for comments, or is this specifically on the budget?
So right now we're just taking some clarifying questions on this slide in particular,
Okay.
And then we'll move on to more of a discussion on our light duty vehicle purchasing.
Okay, I'll wait then.
One clarifying question that I have in the Q&A also is is there, from Beverly to show, any idea when Cvrp will have funds? Cvrp already is open and has funds. There is over 300 million still in that program right now. And so there is no additional future funding currently identified in the state budget for Cvrp.
And to piggyback off that answer, we do anticipate with the funds we have remaining that we will be able to keep the program open for the next couple of fiscal years. So through fiscal year 23-24.
There are no raised hands.
Thanks, Arya. Raquel, I've got another clarifying question on the CBO conversation that we had. Do you want me to raise those now or wait until we get into the next section?
Let's just hold it. I just have a couple more slides and then we'll put that with the general discussion.
Sounds great.
So when looking at the longer term vision for our vehicle purchase incentive programs, it is important that we keep our key priorities in mind. And these priorities include an improved consumer experience by consolidating programs or applications where possible, and increasing program alignment and moving programs to a needs-based model of implementation. We also want to prioritize increased outreach through community-based organizations and other local grassroots organizations to improve awareness of clean transportation incentives in priority communities. As we've seen in previous long-term plan workshops this year, the prices of new and used EVs are still very high when compared to comparable internal combustion engine vehicles. And because of this, it is a priority for us to revisit incentive amounts and set them at levels that are sufficient to assist with the switch to electric for low and moderate income car buyers. And lastly, we also want to increase incentive support for used electric vehicles, as this not only helps to keep the cleaner vehicles in the state, but also provides additional support for a more cost-effective electric vehicle option for low and moderate income car shoppers. So with these priorities in mind and taking stakeholder feedback into consideration, here are a number of program changes we are considering implementing in the next few fiscal years. This includes increasing incentive amounts for lower income car buyers, expanding pre-qualification for Cvrp to bring all incentives to the point of purchase for low income applicants, continuing alignment across programs and addressing areas of duplicity, expanding the community partner network in Cvrp to increase partnerships with and outreach through community-based organizations, continued work towards a single application for all vehicle purchase incentive programs through Access Clean California, and expanded incentive support of electric bicycles. And with our discussion period today, we would like to ask, are there additional suggestions of program improvements we can consider including in this long-term plan and implementing over the next few fiscal years? And while this update to the long-term plan focuses on vehicle purchase incentives through fiscal year 24-25, we also have our eye to what these programs could look like beyond that time frame. We know that it will be important to continue increasing support for used electric vehicles without requiring the participant to scrap a vehicle. And we also recognize that beyond fiscal year 24-25, it might be a time to start phasing out standard rebates in Cvrp and restructure that program to be an equity-only program with a role that is closely coordinated with Clean Cars for All and financing assistance. We do recognize that a lot can change by then, but we would also like to take this opportunity to gather some initial feedback and additional suggestions to consider for the longer term. And with that, we will open it up for kind of more of a general discussion on these slides, as well as anything we've covered throughout the whole workshop today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start calling on raised hands, in an effort to allow as many people to ask questions or state comments as possible, we are asking that you keep your comment or question as brief as possible. If you have a longer comment or question, we are happy to meet with you outside of this workshop to discuss your questions or comments in greater detail. You can use the Zoom feature to raise your hand. For those of you participating by phone, press pound or #2 to raise your hand. When you're called on, please state your name and affiliation. First up, we have Matt Mcgovern. Matt, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you. Thanks for providing this opportunity to comment on Carb's transportation equity programs and light-duty EV incentives. I'm commenting on behalf of Ample, which is a San Francisco-based startup that provides EV battery swapping services to California EV fleets. Battery swapping can help expand EV use beyond affluent suburbanite drivers who can charge in their garage overnight and rarely use public charging. Today, high cost and lengthy charge times mean that neither drivers nor fleet companies can afford to use EVs in high intensity applications. For example, 1 hour a day of EV charging would mean about a $5,000 cost annually for an Uber driver that's considering switching to an EV. So that doesn't work for most fleet drivers. Public charging is also very expensive and often much more expensive than gasoline. So Ample's solution is modular battery swapping that provides 100% charge in minutes at a price lower than gasoline. Looking forward, we strongly encourage Carb to pursue technology neutral performance-based standards that are open to innovative technologies like battery swapping. Technology neutrality is critical variable in dictating whether California is successful in achieving our electrification and decarbonization goals, and doing so in an equitable way. There's no single policy or government agency or corporation that has the capacity to foresee how ideas and technologies will change. So well-designed CARB policies that are technology neutral and avoid command and control style requirements in grant applications or other policy areas, and favor performance-based requirements and technology neutral criteria are the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Next up, we have Tim Tyner. Tim, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you, Aria. My name is Tim Tyner. I'm from the Central California Asthma Collaborative and the Clean Vehicle Empowerment Collaborative in San Joaquin Valley. I want to commend CARB. Really pleased to see a lot of the discussions that we've had in these workshops and in other meetings making it to this stage in the process. Everything we do is to improve the consumer experience and to make it more feasible for low-income buyers to transition to electric. Consolidating programs, increasing program alignment, moving to a needs-based model. I think there still needs to be more discussion about what that's going to look like. Increase in CBO outreach, of course we support that. We also feel that the CBO can play an even larger role in that more high-touch case management. I think our program has sort of demonstrated not just the capability of CBOs, but the utility of having that messenger do more than just outreach. Increasing incentives, I think that is obviously a great idea for families. With the increase in cost we're experiencing with the dealer markups of various things, even the incentives we're getting right now are not sufficient for people to make the jump. But I would encourage us, again, to not get too caught up in the short-term experience of, car pricing. And even if prices come back to somewhat normal or we have better inventories, that if we're able to increase that incentive for lower income families, that again, that just makes it more accessible to more people. Single applications, I really appreciate how Access Clean California has evolved over the past year. I think it's becoming something again that's usable by all Californians. And I think working with CEC and with others to find ways to bring in other resources and other programs. When we do outreach events about EVs, we get just as much interest in solar programs as we do EVs. And it's great to have a resource like Access Clean California to refer people back to. I think we probably need to have more conversation. If there is a alignment and there's a single application for the equity incentives, do we still need access or a benefit finder as the starting point, especially if CBOs are playing more of a role in that intake process? I think that's something we can still talk more about and see what's the most efficient there. And yeah, I think we support everything that you're proposing. So really happy to see this today. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Tim.
And real quick, before we go to other hands in the line, there's a couple of questions in the comment box, I think, that kind of fit in well with your comments, Tim. So, and a question really from Victor B's, does CSE, Carb, Grid have resources for CBOs to help local entities like the air districts, public utility companies, or local governments to refer them to these funds or create their own additional incentives? In my region, they're very limited and basically only have CVRP extended. And for a DAC with low income and high employment rates, that's just not enough. What's the best way to help them get access to those funds? And I think that, you know, within, and I think we've covered some of this, and I know, Victor, your question's been kind of sitting and waiting for just a little bit. There are funds within each of the programs to help support CBOs and funds within Access to do that as well. And just like what Tim said, we recognize that CBOs are doing work beyond our projects too. And I think that there are opportunities for us to support the work that's being done by a CBO and other grassroots organizations that that allows the whole portfolio to be offered, not just CVRP or not just Clean Cars for All or whatever it may be. And we recognize the importance of that. And so I'd say the best way to help them get access to those funds is come in through the Access Network. And I see Tab just turn on her camera too. And so Tab, I'll punt to you if you've got more you want to add there.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we are always thinking about how do we expand the outreach partner network. Taria and James all talked about, you know, the different ways that we are looking to help communities, like looking at where do we have underrepresentation in what communities, where do we have low program uptake. And one of the other things we've also been piloting through Access Clean California is technical assistance and capacity buildings to those smaller grassroots organizations, because a lot of our outreach partner networks, you know, SEIU and CCAC and and others, Native American Environmental Protection Coalition, are groups that are connected to smaller CBOs, but we also want to work with in more directly with those smaller CBOs. And so, but understanding that, and I heard the comment earlier and I wrote it down, I think it was from Piet, that, you know, there are all different levels of CBOs. Many of them have different priorities. And one of the things that we are looking at with our pilot is, you know, helping community-based organizations, like maybe they're not all set up to address EVs or even talk about it. You know, we've been working through our first cohort pilot with folks who were out doing vaccinations and saying, hey, you know, we could get that community-based organization set up and geared with you know, information and material to be able to talk to the community when they're talking to them about vaccines. Like, hey, what are some other things that might help benefit the community? And so I think that's one of the things we're really trying to boost up through Access Clean California, and even, you know, carve out more funding going forward, is how can we, what kind of technical assistance and capacity building do smaller CBOs need? You know, just understanding the organization's priorities and how our priorities tie into that. And so anyway, I just wanted to mention that because we are trying to think about that more broadly. And if there are any specific recommendations you have, we'd love to hear those. So.
Okay, Aria, back to you.
Thanks, Lisa. Next up, we have Eileen Tutt. Eileen, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi again, this is Eileen at the California Electric Transportation Coalition. I just want to say that you didn't mention, but right now, used and new vehicles are very hard to come by, and they are more expensive because of the supply chain issues. Interest rates are going up. We have an economic uncertainty, if not a recession coming. We already have a period of economic uncertainty. It is we just got done with a Juneteenth event, so I'm just telling you, like, it isn't a great time to buy a new car, and it's not a great time to buy a used car either. But new cars in particular are not a very good investment. The second you drive it off the lot, it loses a substantial amount of its value. And in all honesty, most people, most people are not willing to pay more for an electric vehicle than they would for their conventional vehicles. So I guess my comment on this slide, which I don't know if you can go back to slide 18 that shows the considerations, but you're not going to be surprised to hear me say, we do need to focus on encouraging middle-class people that can afford new cars to buy these new cars, because I think sales are going to start, we're going to have a harder time ratcheting up new car sales of any cars, but particular EVs. And so we should go back to the income caps that were pre-February and not reduce them even further as we did in February. So my sense is we need to make CVRP more accessible to more middle income Californians, even though I think we are going to see a depression in sales in general just because of the times we're in, and that will get more cars into the used market, which is where, at least from our experience, a lot of people are more interested in used cars than they are in new cars in these communities, and much more interested in mobility options, just increasing mobility, affordable, zero emission mobility options. So I don't think it makes sense to just give people more money to buy a new car that is going to almost immediately, if you can't afford a new car, it's really not a great idea to buy a new car. And if you can't afford one, it's really also not a great investment. But if you can afford it and you feel like it, then that's okay. So my sense is that, then fortunately that gets into the used market, and that is a more affordable and attractive option for many, in fact, most Californians, almost most, a vast majority of people buy used cars, not new cars. So I think we really need to focus the CVRP, other clean mobility programs. We do need to focus on, I think, getting used cars out there and mobility options and increasing access. But for the CVRP, I think it is important to recognize that, especially right now, the middle income folks are really also struggling to buy any car, and that the CVRP Classic should focus on middle income with some low and moderate income for those that, in other words, I think you know our arguments, but at the end of the day, we believe that you should take the MSRP caps, or the income caps back to pre-February level, particularly given the economic situation we're in now, and the fact that at least in our work, the majority of people in these communities, low income communities in particular, are much more interested in used EVs than they are in a new EV, particularly one, as they all are right now, that is priced substantially above its internal combustion engine counterpart.
Yeah, thanks, Eileen. I know we've heard from several stakeholders and see in the market as well what the car prices look like right now and availability. In fact, I've got two other comments here in the box, I think, that kind of piggyback off of this well, both from Victor B's again. If we can encourage car dealers to get more ZEVs in the lot for their inventory, in some cases, people are driving 100+ miles to find vehicle options. Even when there's, major brand dealers right nearby, nobody's really carrying the vehicles. And then, further, as an outreach partner, they've been doing outreach for ACC and CVRP in the community, and the community doesn't feel attracted with the incentives that are available, especially when you're comparing them to San Joaquin Valley or Bay Area, who have access to more than $10,000 when you're stacking the incentives. So we recognize that there's a lot of different ways to look at this, whether we're looking at the caps, whether we're looking at the incentive amounts. The market as it is right now is it's interesting because we are still seeing the ZEV market grow. When we're looking at numbers that are being reported as new vehicle registrations, those numbers continue to climb. And it's hard to understand that, knowing what we know anecdotally about what's happening, what consumer experience is when they're going on the lots. And when they're looking for the vehicles, and I think that, you know, the bulk of that is obviously, I think we all know the largest seller right now is Tesla, and I think we are still seeing a lot of those take off here. But again, the incentive amounts are something that we're trying to get our head around, and whether or not we should be looking at those and how we look at the caps and things like that. We do have another CVRP work group coming up soon. There'll be an announcement for that shortly, if it hasn't gone out already, where we can talk kind of more about CVRP specific. But I think as we're talking again about all these programs, we're feeling these same issues across all of the programs, and trying to find ways to make sure that the incentive is matched right, and that we're considering the needs of the consumers, and that we're structuring the programs in the ways that help move the funds quickly. I think that's for us is the most important thing for us to focus on. We did get another question in here as well about when we would have CVAP funds. We do currently only have about 15 million, actually a little bit less than that, a little less than 15 million available that we can put into running our solicitation. We have held off on doing that for a couple of reasons. We do have a reservation list we're trying to reserve. Those consumers, we're in the process right now of getting those consumers' needs met, and don't know how much additional funds we might need to kind of close the gap on that prior reservation list. But once we have a better sense of that, we do have those funds, but we want to wait and see what happens with the budget, because running a solicitation for $12 million is very different than running a solicitation for $1 million or $100 million. So we do hope to have those funds out to the program with a new after our solicitation a little bit later on this year.
Aria, are there any other hands raised?
There is Jonathan Changus. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Jonathan Changus again with the Center for Sustainable Energy, and just kind of a couple, I think 2 areas in particular, high level considerations as we're looking at all of the programs, both CVRP and financing assistance and Clean Cars for All is, alignment's been mentioned a couple of different times, and that's really important, not only when talking to consumers, but also when we're trying to bring dealers in to be participating. Point of sale rebates are fantastic, and they're only plausible and doable if you have participating dealerships. And the more complexity and difference in the programs, the harder it can be for us to attract across the programs participants. So to the extent there's alignment, it makes it easier, obviously, for the applicants to make heads and tails of where they stack and where they don't, what's available to them. But it also makes it easier for our community partners to talk about programs, which is great. And it also helps with our dealerships. So I'm not proposing a specific number, but I do think that we would be really advantaged in the state to have kind of consistent definitions when we say low and moderate income, what is meant by that. And part of that's legislative. There's been different definitions, of course, provided at different points. So I recognize that. So it's not necessarily saying, Carb, why haven't you fixed this yet? But it is recognizing that when we can't even define low and moderate income consistently, and the 3 programs kind of sort of sometimes do, federal poverty level versus area median income, and going back to kind of low carbon fuel standard programs like the used EV rebates that will be coming from the investor-owned utilities have to use a different definition. So we're not going to be able to fix everything, but to the extent, at least for the Carb programs, that there's moderate income is a known level, low income is, to the extent we can get some alignment there, it's going to make it easier for all parties involved to talk about the programs, including the applicants, including the CVOs, including the dealerships. The other piece in kind of a similar vein is what vehicles are we trying to encourage the purchase and lease of? And then the incentive design is also very different, right? Whether it's, financing assistance and Clean Cars for All, a BEV, a PHEV, fuel cell may get the same amount of money versus, of course, a different program design for CVRP. And there were some policy justifications for that previously, just suggesting that maybe we look at that again. Because to the extent that it's a little more consistent, if we're trying to provide the increased rebate through Cvrp for low-income consumers, the more it looks and feels like the same kind of intervention for others, the easier it is to talk about it. The easier it is to either align, stack, or to not stack. Instead of going to 2 programs, just get the rebate through 1 with Simplify. It doesn't mean there aren't complications with some of that as well, but to the extent the rebates are for similar vehicles and the design is a little more similar than it is currently, just makes it a lot easier to communicate, coordinate, and attract participation from applicants, from our CBO advocates to talk about it, as well as from the dealerships. So high level bits as we're going forward here that I wanted to share. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan, for those comments.
There are no more raised hands.
Lisa, do we have anything in the Q&A box, or is it empty now? Okay.
Yep.
I believe I just saw a hand go up.
Yep. Tim Tyner, I have unmuted your mic.
I apologize to everyone on the call who thought we were done. I wanted to wait and make sure everyone had a chance to chime in before I raised my hand a second time. I just want to make a couple really quick replies to things that have been said since. So I agree with Jonathan 100% about the alignment of the different criteria, both how we define income, but also how the incentives, you know, if we're going to have tiered incentives and if they're going to be at different FPL percentages, and if they're going to increase by lower FPL, that it's the same across all the equity programs. It's really difficult for our staff when they're trying to explain different programs and you qualify differently depending on, you know, one person meets one criteria in one program, not another. The dealership is also, until you've been in that space, you don't realize how difficult it is. And we spend a lot of our time chasing dealers to try to get them to sign up to be in these programs. As Victor mentioned, I think we're lucky enough that we have rebate now in the whole San Joaquin Valley. So we get down payment assistance of up to $9,500 on a BEV. But that means that the dealership has to participate in both programs. And that has been a real challenge to get them to do that, as well as clean fuel reward. So again, having a single program, or not program, but having a single process with one dealer network would make our lives much easier on the CBO side working with clients. And then to Eileen's point, you know, it's valid. Prices today for both new and used is just out of the reach for most people. We have right now more than 50 clients who got approved for the $9,500. So between rebate now and clean vehicle assistance, they have that money approved and they can't get a vehicle because the prices are just too high or the vehicles aren't available. What we're looking forward to, and this will be my last comment, is, you know, if OEMs follow through like GM has said, and they produce a Bolt that's under $30,000, and we can tack on a $10,000 incentive, so you're getting a brand new EV for under $20,000. We have a lot of families that want to take that on, and they would rather do that than spend 15 or even 10 on a used vehicle. And if you're really tracking the used EV market, you'll find used EVs are holding their value even better than ICE cars now. And that drive off the lot and suddenly you lose all the value. I bought my EV 3 years ago, and if I trade it in today, it's worth more than what I bought it for. And I know that a lot of that is just the market, it's changed and the demand is so high today, but I never thought my car would increase in value, and it's up by almost 20% higher than what I paid for it 3 years later. So I think we also have to look at things a little differently than we used to as far as new versus used vehicles when we talk about electric cars, because I think we're going to see that trend. You know, obviously they're not going to be increasing in value, but I think that immediately decrease is not going to be the same thing we're used to with ICE vehicles. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, for those additional comments.
There are no more raised hands unless someone does it right now.
Okay, well, I'm going to go on for the time being then to next steps. And Again, thank you all for the great discussion today. I just want to take the last few minutes to go over some next steps. Carb staff will take the input received today, as well as what has been received in our previous workshops and work groups, and we will continue our analysis and finalize this update to the long-term plan. The final plan will be included in the fiscal year 2022-23 funding plan for clean transportation incentives as Appendix C, as it has in previous years. And the funding plan will be heard before the board this November. Additionally, Carb staff will provide updates to this plan in future funding plans. I also just want to take a moment to provide our contact information. If you have any remaining questions or would like to provide additional suggestions or just talk offline about our programs, once you've had some more time to digest today's presentation, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the other program leads. And if you would like to continue to be involved in our public process surrounding the funding plan, I do encourage you to subscribe to our Gov Delivery listserv. And it looks like no more questions have come in and no one's raised hands. So I think we'll go into closing today's workshop. And thank you again to everyone for participating today and in all of our other previous workshops and work groups we've had along the way. Your input is definitely much appreciated as we finalize our plan and proposal that will be heard before the board later this year. Again, many thanks to everyone and have a great rest of your day.